Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us. Happy April Fools. I won't be telling any jokes today because there's nothing to joke about as we begin our top story of the night. Out of the great state of Georgia, a not-so-great story. Those of you who have tuned into Lou's show, the Great America Show, or Lou Dobbs Tonight, over the last few years, would have heard about a case that we've talked about, as I said, for the last few years, down in Georgia. The case, Curling v. Raffensperger. It's been going on for 8 years, and a year ago, it went to trial. Okay? We now today got a ruling from Judge Amy Totenberg, and the ruling states this, quote, "The court lacks jurisdiction to consider the merits of the plaintiff's claims." A year after this case went to trial, Judge Amy Totenberg comes back with this ruling. 8 years after the case began in Georgia. Now, the case from the inception was to get rid of electric voting machines in Georgia because, as they say, the susceptibility to fraud and hacking and changing votes. So at that trial a year ago, they had J. Alex Halderman, who's perhaps one of the smartest folks in this country, maybe in the world, on voting machines and how susceptible they are to rigging. Take a listen to Mr. Halderman testifying before Congress. Now, I'll preface it with this. Halderman, during that trial for this case, Curling v. Raffensperger, hacked a voting machine in a mere 30 seconds using a Bic pen, a $1 Bic pen, hacked the voting machine and changed votes using that pen. Take a listen to him testifying on Capitol Hill about these voting machines.
I'm a professor of computer science and have spent the last 10 years studying the electronic voting systems that our nation relies on. My conclusion from that work is that our highly computerized election infrastructure is vulnerable to sabotage and even to cyber attacks that could change votes. These realities risk making our election results more difficult for the American people to trust. I know America's voting machines are vulnerable because my colleagues and I have hacked them repeatedly as part of a decade of research studying the technology that operates elections and learning how to make it stronger. We've created attacks that can spread from machine to machine like a computer virus and silently change election outcomes. We've studied touchscreen and optical scan systems, and in every single case, we've found ways for attackers to sabotage machines and to steal votes. These capabilities are certainly within reach for America's enemies. As you know, states choose their own voting technology, and while some states are doing well with security, others are alarmingly vulnerable. This puts the entire nation at risk. In close elections, an attacker can probe the most important swing states or swing counties, find areas with the weakest protection, and strike there. In a close election year, changing a few votes in key localities could be enough to tip national results. The key lesson from 2016 is that these threats are real. Some say the fact that voting machines aren't directly connected to the internet makes them secure, but unfortunately, this is not true. Voting machines are not as distant from the internet as they may seem. Across the country, there are about 52 different models of machines. They fall into essentially two styles, ones that scan a piece of paper or ones where the voter just interacts with the touch screen. And many of them have been analyzed now by researchers looking for security vulnerabilities. In every single case where a U.S. voting machine has been analyzed by competent security researchers, they have found vulnerabilities that would let someone inject malicious software and change election data. Every single case. Voting machines are not connected to the internet. This is something that you hear all the time in the U.S. from election officials. Unfortunately, it's not actually true. And many new voting machines come with 4G wireless modems so that they can be connected to the internet from the polling place in order to upload the results faster. Now, to me, that sounds crazy. Why would you want to put your voting machines on the internet right in the middle of the election, potentially at the most vulnerable time? I'm pretty sure my undergrad computer security class at Michigan could have changed the outcome of the 2016 Michigan election if we wanted to. It is that bad. And we have a combination of very powerful adversaries and unfortunately quite vulnerable and obsolete systems. That's why I say it's only a matter of time.
So that's J. Alex Halderman over the last few years. Interesting thing about that all is J. Alex Halderman has never been sued. It brings an interesting point because just about everybody else has been sued. Newsmax has been sued. Fox News has been sued. Tucker Carlson has been sued. Lou Dobbs has been sued. And we've all sat through depositions of hours for these lawsuits about voting machines. Fox even settling one of those lawsuits so stupidly, paying, I think, $800. I'm not even going to quote the number, but it was a ridiculous sum of money. And we've got this man who's never been sued, and I'm not advocating for that at all. But what I'm saying is it's very interesting because these companies, these voting machine companies, swore up and down, sued because they said that their machines can't be susceptible to fraud or vulnerabilities. So what happened in the 2016 election? You hear Halderman talking about the 2020 election. You hear Halderman talking about the 2016 election. Very interesting. Very interesting timing now, as I believe it's time for President Trump and his Department of Justice to start investigating what happened in 2020. People are getting a little annoyed. People are getting fed up. People went to jail over the 2020 election. People lost millions of dollars over the 2020 election. And as I said, people's lives were turned upside down by lawsuits with the 2020 election from these companies. It's time for President Trump's Department of Justice to do what's right and get rid of these voting machines once and for all. Democrats have always been against them. Always, historically. Now, all of a sudden, they're for them. Let's take a trip down memory lane and listen to some of these Democrats who, before 2020, were all about investigating the vulnerabilities of these machines. Now, all of a sudden, things have changed. Let's take a listen.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that, a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact, 3 companies are controlling this.
It is the individual voting machines that pose some of the greatest risks.
There are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic voting machine. It was possible to switch votes.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors.
We know how vulnerable now our systems were. I know the hackathon that took place last year, where virtually every machine was broken into fairly quickly.
I actually held a demonstration for my colleagues here at the Capitol, where we brought in folks who, before our eyes, hacked election machines. Those that are being used in many states.
Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
In a close presidential election, they just need to hack one swing state, or maybe 1 or 2, or maybe just a few counties in one swing state.
I'm very concerned that you could have a hack that finally went through.
None of those people were sued either. Interesting, right? That's before the 2020 election. They had all that to say, and now all of a sudden they're all in favor of these machines. Very interesting. Elections have consequences, and that stolen 2020 election is the reason we have about 92% of these rogue judges in the D.C. district were appointed by Democrats who are now staging a coup against President Trump's administration, stopping every single order that he puts forward. stolen elections have consequences. And if you're wondering what's going on in the House of Representatives this week, they're on break. Mike Johnson sending them for a week-long break after failing to pass a procedural vote on the floor. Mike Johnson this week, Mike Johnson telling them all to go home. So, yeah, no repercussions, no accountability for these rogue judges that were supposed to be taken up this week in Congress. Some other bills, citizenship requirement for voter registration, also not getting taken up this week because Mike Johnson decided to send those people home. So I guess we'll have to come back next week. We're now 3 months in, and 3 months from January 1st, of course. And the House has done absolutely nothing under Mike Johnson's leadership. Congratulations, Mr. Speaker. Folks, tomorrow is a big day for America, as President Trump puts it. President Trump is calling it his Liberation Day for America. Retaliatory tariffs are going into effect against nations who take advantage of America, who take advantage of our kindness, who take advantage of it all. I asked our guest today, Jerry Storch. He's a former CEO of the famous chain that you probably all know so well, Toys R Us. He's also the founder and CEO of Storch Advisors. I asked him to join us today to go into what these tariffs are going to mean for the consumer, what they're going to mean for the country, long-term and short-term, and how we'll come out. Will we come out on top, or will we come out on the bottom like the Marxist Dems want us to? Jerry, thanks so much for joining us today on the Great America Show. I appreciate you taking the time. I want to start with first, tomorrow, which is President Trump's, quote, Liberation Day for America, where retaliatory tariffs go into effect. We're going to get to that, but I want to get to Goldman Sachs putting out their economic outlook, saying the economy is shrinking. We now are looking at a 35% chance of a U.S. recession. As Mr. Retail, give me your sense, what you feel right now, what you see right now, and any indicators pointing one way or the other.
Look, I first of all, I'd say they don't know any more than you or I do. They're just yapping. Saying there's a 1 in 3 chance of something, they can say they were right no matter what happens as we look to the future. So it doesn't really matter to me what they say. When you get to the question of what I see out there, what I see is a consumer that's been leveraged, been struggling for a couple of years now as inflation has exceeded the growth in their wages, and as they've been leveraging up their balance sheets. But that's nothing new. It probably slowed down a little in the last month or two, but more relative to what it did in November and December when consumers went nuts. They were so excited about President Trump getting elected, and even the Democrats who didn't vote for him thought he'd do better with the economy than the predecessor. So we had a really strong November, December, and then January, February, March, like they've slowed down relative to that. But really, the pace of change year over year, what happened, for example, in February compared to what happened last February of last year, what's happening now in March compared to last March is pretty much the same, growing 2 to 3% a year, about with inflation. But that's what it's been doing for years. Yeah. So I don't know if it's any different than it ever was, or that we're any more likely to have a problem than we were before. It's very clear that people had kind of hoped there'd be more improvement more rapidly than there has been after President Trump has come in. And so there's some kind of brooding sort of potential crisis of rising expectations. We expected it to be so much better, and it's not so much better yet. But I think we have some time here. I'm not ready to call the game.
Jerry, you're a man who spent your life in retail. If you would tell the audience, nothing happens overnight. The man's been in office for 2 months. And, I say to everybody, if in 6 months, even 6 months is not enough, a year long, if things don't start to balance out, 2 years, I think then we can start throwing the stones. But, we came from an administration, Jerry, where they put billions and trillions of dollars into unnecessary things. Now we're seeing, not even with the Doge Committee, but all the wasteful money that was spent throughout this world. It's not even just this country and this economy. Of course, we're going to start shrinking a little bit. When you're taking $1 trillion out of the GDP that was spent on unnecessary things, that's considered a shrinkage. Is it a bad thing? Absolutely not. On paper, it's a shrinkage, but nonetheless, it's one that needs to happen. We cannot continue to keep running ridiculous numbers on the balance sheets through the roof that are unsustainable. You look at how much money we're paying on interest just on the debt. It's completely unsustainable. Would you explain for the audience, for us laymen out there, the destruction, if we don't slow this government down, if we don't stop spending, the destruction and the long-lasting effect it's going to have on this country and the U.S. dollar.
Well, the biggest thing clearly is that this enormous deficit spending has driven the high rate of inflation that we've seen. You heard the nonsense out of the prior administration that inflation was somehow caused by COVID or supply chains or or the Ukraine war, when it's pretty obvious inflation was caused by what it's always caused by, which is the government spending too much money compared to what it's taking in. So that is overheated many parts of the economy and distorted much of the spending. And when the spending that takes place is not productive, i.e., if it doesn't increase the productivity of the economy, the ability to manufacture things, the ability to produce value, but it's merely sort of given away to people, then it's wasted money instead of money that drives future growth. Because the way out of a deficit spending situation is through growth in the top line of the economy as a whole. It's an improvement in the productivity of the overall economy. And that's what we need to get to and what we need to see.
I spoke with Grant Cardone yesterday, a venture capital guy, owns a bunch of real estate. And he said to me, John, you want to get an alcoholic off the alcohol, you stop giving them alcohol. You want to get a gambler to stop gambling, you take them out of the casino. You want a guy to stop doing drugs, you take the drugs away. You want to get them to stop spending, you take the money away. And I mean, we're seeing just absolute total fits now from the left about the fact that Donald Trump wants to cut the size of government. He wants to cut the ridiculous, wasteful spending in our governments. Something that a lot of people aren't talking about, and it's something that you've probably looked at very heavily over the course of your career, and it's credit card spending. The amount of money that is being spent on credit cards now is at all-time highs, and it's not just among regular aged people from 18 to 30 to 50. It's among the elderly people, too. To me, that's a massive red flag. What can you tell me about that?
Well, there's no doubt. It's at all-time record highs. I've run a number of credit card businesses in my career, and we're seeing all-time debt levels. Keep in mind, that's on top of the government debt levels that we were just talking about. So then you have individual also incurring a lot of debt and sort of, spending forward the future and spending money they don't have yet in order to live now. And a lot of that's being spent on services. People think, oh, the consumer's so healthy. Look at consumer spending. Well, a lot of that's spent on healthcare and on housing. People are borrowing money to pay the rent in a way, because money is fungible. If you take a look at what's actually going on, so that's a potential problem for the future. The only way out of this is to grow, and that's why it's so important that we get to the decrease in regulation in the economy, deregulation, that we get to the tax cuts that are coming down the line there, because that kind of balances off the deflationary effect of pulling government spending back. Because if you just pull government spending back and don't do anything else, it's sort of the flip coin of spending too much money, which was very inflationary. Spending less money is deflationary, and you're going to see that slow down in the economy unless you do something to keep it going and to get it growing.
Yeah, you're talking about meaningful things, doing things like that. Whereas you hear people saying, "Well, Jerome Powell should start cutting interest rates and doing this." That's a momentary thing where the market will take a hit for the day or rise in most occasions, as it does because they're cutting interest rates. But it's not necessarily a good thing for the economy, and it's not necessarily a good thing for the money borrower. Is that correct?
Well, interest rates should be sort of derived from everything else going on, not used as the cause, right, or the stimulus to cause something to happen. It shouldn't be that we do that to artificially keep the economy going when it's otherwise in a deflationary situation.
Well, I think it was Jerome Powell who I talked to you before the show. My father, who was banking his whole life, says you should not have a lawyer running the Federal Reserve, number one. But number two, the other issue is you look how many rate cuts he gave to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden in the final year of their presidency. I think it was two or three rate cuts. And then the amount of money that Joe Biden dumped in, there's reports it's billions of dollars into the economy right before he left because he knew that it would have an effect like it's having right now on the markets. Your thoughts?
Well, again, we need to get moving with the tax cuts and the deregulation that will counteract. We cannot continue to use simply monetary policy to drive results. We have to create real value. We have to create an economy that's growing. And if we do that, then everything else takes care of itself. It's the only way to deal with the reality that interest expenditures and other required payments for Medicare and Medicaid and other things are so high. The only way to deal with it is to grow the top line, grow the economy, so those shrink, relatively speaking.
The Trump tax cuts, which are supposed to be coming now, I think before September is when they're slated to get the corporate tax cuts. And I talked to a lot of Democrats and people on the left and on the right, and the consensus I get from people who don't understand is Trump's giving another tax cut to the rich. He's giving another tax cut to corporations. Would you explain to the audience, Jerry, what exactly a tax cut does for a corporation, for its employees, for its longevity, and for its growth when you're giving a company its money back to put back into the company?
First of all, from my perspective, the whole idea of even taxing a corporation is kind of ridiculous because, a corporation is not a person.
Right.
So the way capitalism works, people forget, like, we live in a capitalist world. And what is it? It's where people pool their money and they invest it in a corporation, which then has huge sums of money to spend on stuff like building factories, like drilling for oil, like all kinds of productive things that drive the economy forward. That's what differentiated capitalism from everything that came before. That's what allowed the Industrial Revolution, everything to happen going forward, was this notion of pooling money and then investing it to grow the future. When you tax that money, you're kind of taxing it a second time. It was earned the first time by the people who are investing it. Now you're taxing it when it's supposed to be generating productivity, when it's supposed to be generating jobs. And so when you tax a corporation, all you're doing is slowing down that positive productivity cycle. So the whole idea of taxing a corporation is, in economically, in my opinion, somewhat problematic. But if you say, well, we're going to have that whether you like it or not, the higher you go, the less productive the economy becomes. And that means you can employ less people. Our healthcare system is dependent upon people having private insurance. That's where it comes from.
Right.
It comes in corporations. Everything, people have jobs, they have families, they have healthcare because of the growth of corporations. Now you're going to tax it and slow down that growth and make our economy less productive when you do that. So it's kind of crazy to view a corporation as rich. It's not rich or poor. It's a corporation.
Everything you just said has exploded the minds of every Bernie Sanders supporter out there, because they seem to think that America can run not with corporations. You remember Occupy Wall Street, where these idiots took to the streets and they said, get rid of banks, get rid of everything. Well, where do you go get your money, numbskull? Who paid for your college tuition? Who paid for the car that you're driving? Who paid for those clothes? Because you probably paid for it on a debit card or a credit card, didn't you?
Well, after a couple of generations of affluence, I think that the children of the people who created all of this sort of don't understand where the money comes from,
right?
How it's generated and how capitalism works. Capitalism used to be a positive word, by the way, and now even when you say it, you're afraid someone's going to come attack you, as if, how dare you be a capitalist, as if that's kind of like a negative thing, when it's really what our whole system is based on and how wealth is generated.
Exactly. I'd bet you any amount of money it's some of those same people who are currently burning Teslas right now because they think it's going to change the world. We're talking with Jerry Storch. We're coming right back. He's the former CEO of Toys R Us, and he's the founder and CEO of Storch Advisors. A terrific conversation we're having. When we return, I want to talk about the tariffs, because you say they're not that big of a deal, and I agree with you, but there's people's minds are exploding, and Wall Street, those guys on Wall Street, I don't know what the hell they're doing, but we're going to take that up with Jerry when we return, folks. Stay with us.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupting this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. any size, any color. So go to mypillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Folks, we're back with Jerry Storch. He's the former CEO of Toys R Us, one of my favorite stores as a kid. Probably not one of my parents' favorite stores, as most parents who are watching this show. He's also the CEO of Storch Advisors. Jerry, I want to turn to tariffs because if you listen to the left, they tell you it's going to destroy the country. If you listen to the right, they say it's a long-term solution. Before we get into that, I want to first preface Canada, who President Trump has taken aim at recently. The U.S. goods imported from Canada in 2024 totaled about $412 billion. Exports from Canada to America was about $350 billion, giving us a deficit of $64 billion. You never want to run a deficit. We're running deficits. So people's minds are exploding about the tariffs. President Trump is going after Canada for no reason. No, it's not for no reason. Canada has this quota-type tariff system in place, and it hits people in certain places. Dairy's among one of them, 270%. It's some of the quotas. Cheese, 245%. Butter, almost 300%. Chicken, eggs, poultry, 230%. Peanut butter, 270%. Sugar, 200%. And this is all part of their quota system. Now, if you want to go to some of the normal things, Jerry, 18% on domestic products for clothing. But just a total mess that people don't understand. Canada's been killing us for years.
Well, I just think there's a perception in the rest of the world, and there's a perception in parts of the U.S. that the U.S. is so wealthy that we can afford anything. So whereas, the poor farmers in Quebec, who have their French cows, need to be protected, or else the giant U.S. agricultural combines will destroy their way of life. And so they justify that to put quotas and their tariffs into effect to protect industries they want to protect. And when you start talking about this general topic, if you listen to any Canadian official, they quickly get off of it. They don't want to talk about what they do. They just want to talk about the terrible things that President Trump is doing and that the U.S. is threatening. So that's what I believe President Trump's talking about when he's talking about reciprocal tariffs and trying to set those things right. It's really, if it's hard for the U.S. to justify in their minds, putting tariffs on imported goods, so how come they can do it? And that's true across the board. And their answer will be, well, the U.S. is so big, it would destroy us if we didn't do that. And meanwhile, we have this giant market that's open to them. And you go through city after city in our industrial heartland, and you see closed factories and in some cases, very poor living conditions.
And you look at some of the things that we import and export from Canada, it's things that we can do without. We can certainly do without. Crude oil. We import a massive amount of crude oil from Canada. I mean, we're the largest crude oil exporters in the world. Why are we even wasting our time with these people when they clearly, number one, they don't appreciate anything we do for them. We're also their military power too. They seem to forget. You hear things like, I'm gonna play this clip from Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, taking it extremely personal when it's business. Take a listen to it.
We have two options here. We either roll over as a country and he runs us over 15 times and gets what he wants, or we feel a little bit of pain and we fight like we've never fought before. I do not want to hurt other provinces on that, but I can assure you one thing, we're going to make sure that we inflict as much pain as possible to the American people without inflicting pain on the Canadian population.
I mean, to me, that's extremely petty and extremely personal. Donald Trump has not made it personal at all. He's made it about the fact that we're being taken advantage of. Your thoughts?
Well, I think we'd all like to get to a point where nobody was doing it to anybody. And it's disingenuous to imply that it's all one way. And that's the problem with what he's saying and what they're saying. And so they want to keep in place a status quo that's not equal. And so what I hear from our administration is they want reciprocity. They want it to be the same. And so I think we'd all be happy with that. I think we'd be happy with no tariffs in either direction. if everyone would agree to that. But that's not that's the whole point of reciprocity is to whatever it is, whether it's 0 or whether it's 20%, it should be the same.
Right. You need to level the playing field for people. Back in 2018, 2019, you and I were talking before the show. This is not the first time President Trump has put retaliatory tariffs on people. In 2018, 19, it was on India, it was on China. And you didn't hear the stink about anything that was going on. It was probably because they were trying to impeach him at that time or figuring out a way to get him out on the 25th Amendment. But you didn't see the consumer price indexed inflation rise crazily. It stayed around the 2%, 2.5% that it stayed. Are people blowing the whole tariff thing out of proportion? Who's going to eat the prices? Yeah. Is it going to be as bad as they say?
Well, so we do have that precedent. And I said then it wasn't going to be as bad as people were saying. They did, by the way, say that the sky was falling back then. And the stock market, as I recall, did decline by several percent, 3%, whatever the day it was announced. And there were a couple of declines back then, nothing like what we're seeing now. And again, the tariffs weren't as broad-based either as what President Trump is talking about now. But when all is said and done and the dust is cleared, what all the studies I see say is that the tariffs on China, for example, that affected the toy industry that I knew quite deeply and other consumer goods, that 87% of them were absorbed at the source. In other words, the manufacturers absorbed 87% of the tariff increase. So it wasn't a giant price increase on the American consumer. 13% was passed on. Keep in mind that tariffs are on the cost of the goods, not on the retail price. And that's why there are billboards up all over the place that, in Florida now, the Canadians put them up saying tariffs are a tax. Well, they're not a sales tax, I'll tell you that, because a sales tax would be on the retail price. Tariffs are on the cost, which is often a fraction of the retail price, depending upon the item that you're talking about. It could be only a third of the retail price. In some items, it's more than that. So you're starting with the 20 or 25% on only the cost, not on the retail price. Right. And then even of that, then you debate that with the manufacturer. How much are they going to take, or how much are you going to take of that? And a lot of that balance of power depends upon how much you can be, in your negotiating position as a retailer or someone buying the product from the China or Canada or wherever, on your ability to move it elsewhere. That gives you leverage. And if they're afraid you're going to leave, then they might be willing to eat almost all of it. And so it just depends on the product, what really gets passed along and how much of a tax it actually is.
I want to turn to the reasoning behind these tariffs and the reasoning behind it all, because it really annoys me, because the Trump administration has such a good opportunity right now to tell the American people what's happening, why we're in this situation in the first place, how we got here, and how we're going to get out. And the thing that annoys me is I haven't seen from anyone, and it's not his job, it's his administration, to come out and say, this is how we got here. From President Clinton all the way back up to Joe Biden to Barack Obama, they took everything that you guys owned and they offshored it. You don't believe me? Go look at Nike. They outsource 100% of their production outside of America. They did $51 billion in revenue for 2024. 21 billion of it in America. You look at Apple, virtually every single Apple product is made through China or somewhere in Asia, over 95% of their products, in fact. 2024, their global revenue was $391 billion, $167 billion in America. General Motors, another one, an American company going up to Canada, going down to Mexico. So what I think that the administration should be doing is saying, this is how we got here. Our goal is to bring jobs back to America. Now, I say all the time, Jerry, I understand there's going to be certain jobs you're never going to be able to be back here. Nike for one of them. Textiles is very hard to bring here in America. It's so damn expensive to make. The pollution of it all, it's very hard. That I understand. But there's no reason that we should be making Caterpillar machinery over in China. To me, it's completely unacceptable. So I want to get your sense on why we're really in this situation, as to why President Trump is so upset about the offshoring of American jobs and what it's done to this country and this economy.
Look, the reason why products are made overseas instead of the U.S. is not complicated. It's because it's less expensive. It costs less. When you look at what it costs, for example, to make like a great one, batteries, right? Like AA batteries, or I've looked at this before. When you make them domestically, it's very expensive. There are huge environmental concerns, huge safety concerns. When they're made in China, they don't seem to care. I don't know what, but it's a lot cheaper to get batteries made in China. And whether they're dumping all the waste products into some waste pond or whatever it is, who knows? But there's why else is it cheaper? Well, the people don't make a lot of money over there. That's interesting. They don't earn very much money, and they work really long hours. And when you go over to China, I've been over there many times and visited factories. The workers don't even live in their hometowns. They live in dormitories on the manufacturing campus far from their hometown, so they can make money to get back to people who live back home. Their working hours, their wage conditions would not be acceptable to us in the United States. They would violate our health and safety laws. We wouldn't allow it. There's a lot of discussion about the Uyghurs, ethnic minority in China, where they talk about using slave labor to make products. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons why it's cheaper. They pollute like crazy. If you go over to China, they go, oh, it's a blue sky day. You look up, have you been in China on a blue sky day? You can't see the sky. I'm sorry. I don't know what they're talking about. I guess it's a less gray day. That's because they use coal to manufacture products. I've seen the people working late at night in China in like small factories, small areas where they're burning like this smoky coal to keep the building warm. So totally different situation. So the question is, they're polluting. They're not. There's child labor, slave labor, everything else in the world over there. And we try to regulate it theoretically and all this from afar, which we really can't do. So the question is that an even playing field? So, of course, it's cheaper to make it there than it would be in the U.S. It's not because they're smarter or better people than we are, than our people who live in Michigan and work hard for a living, too. So are we okay with that, with having them be sort of the world's factory? And it doesn't change, by the way, if you're a big advocate for stopping global warming, whether the pollution takes place in China or the U.S.,
makes no difference.
It's the same thing. So if you don't care about those things, fine, we'll get it the cheapest possible place and won't even look. Now, if you start looking, maybe you go, wait a second, that's pretty bad. So maybe the idea behind something like tariffs is to equalize that and say we got to put the true cost of what they're doing on the product and not act like it's cheaper when the only reason it's cheaper is stuff we find totally unacceptable as a country, as a people.
You're absolutely right. I want to take one more quick break. We're coming right back with Jerry Storch, former CEO of Toys R Us. He's the CEO and founder of Storch Advisors. I want to take that up because it's an issue I talk about every day on this show, and it's greed in America. Everyone wants a gouge. Everyone wants to make more money, but they don't want to pay more money for their labor. They don't want to pay more money for anything. They just want it in their own pockets. We're going to take that up with Jerry Storch. We're coming right back. Folks, stay with us.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Folks, we're back with Jerry Storch. He's the former CEO of Toys R Us, and he's the founder and CEO of Storch Advisors. Jerry, we really appreciate talking with you today. It's been a terrific conversation. Before we let you go, I want to talk about what I had just mentioned before we went to break there, and it's greed. As you just perfectly laid out last segment, pollutants in the water. These are the same people now who want to drive electric cars, not realizing what goes into making an electric battery. Same people who are burning those electric cars right now. It's like a whole hypocrisy thing. But we've gotten to this point in America where it's greed and greed and greed. And I really started to notice it after COVID happened. You go into a restaurant, Jerry, and you order a Caesar salad. And I use this as an example all the time. $19 for a Caesar salad. Now I go shopping. I go buy a head of romaine lettuce or a head of iceberg lettuce. It's still $1, Jerry. It was maybe 90 cents back then, maybe 85 cents. So you get 15%, 15 cents, 10 cents. How do these restaurants justify now charging you an extra $8 or $9? So the level of greed has gone from low levels to the complete total macro levels, and it's the same thing with Apple. Apple wants to be able to make a phone for $20 instead of $50, and instead of making $500 billion, make $600 billion. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm a big believer in capitalism. So if the product is differentiated, and if you could really, and if the buyer is willing to pay the price, I don't have a big problem with that, as long as all the facts are available and are on the table. And you talk about what the cost of lettuce is. Do people know that? There's no doubt that the cost of employees in that restaurant has increased, but maybe not by as much as the cost of the salad. So I guess I'm not quite as kind of whacked out if it's a free enterprise system by an increase in prices. What I want to make sure is that you have a system where competition does take place, where it's not so heavily regulated that you can't have competitive outlets arise to compete with the ones that exist, because I want to count on the free market and capitalism to sort of tampen down greed, to tampen down price increases. And you go, well, why isn't that happening? Because I'm seeing all these things that look like it's not happening. Then I have to conclude that there are, in essence, monopolies that have been created, even at a low scale. And what would create those? And I come right back to the biggest thing probably is overregulation. There's a lot of talk about the lack of housing in California because you can't build it because there's so much regulation involved in trying to construct anything. You can't get land for it because of the environmental regulations. Whatever it is, if you have less regulation, let capitalism be unfettered, then greed only works for good then, because then people come in and try to open up competitors, and that will drive prices down. So I think that's kind of the answer. And if there's too much greed now, it's because there's not enough competition.
Well, that's what I was just going to say to you. The problem is we've got these iPhones, right? And I can never get off an iPhone. I've tried an Android before. I can't do it. So I'm at the point now, Jerry, where if Apple says it's $5,000 for a phone, I've got no choice because I'm so attached to this thing and I don't know how to use anything else, and I don't want to learn to use anything else. But these companies are turning record profit sharing, and I agree with you on the whole capitalism thing and the free markets and the fair trade. But at what point does it become that these people are price gouging? Now, you've got two main manufacturers of cell phone. You've got Apple and I guess maybe Samsung. Right. So there's not really much there. You've got other people who've tried to enter the markets. Huawei, obviously, we're not selling Chinese phones here in America. But you have certain things where these people are turning record profits. And I'm not sitting here being a Bernie Sanders kind of guy. I'm looking at it from being an American who are watching American people struggle, watching debt rise through the roofs in every single home. And as you said before, for bare necessities. So at what point does it become price gouging on these people who are just getting greedy off the backs of slave labor in China and capitalism?
Well, I'm not smart enough to know that, but
Me neither.
When you try to say, when is it price gouging? And I don't want to be the regulator in charge of enforcing, sort of prices. And because prices are the most important signal in capitalism. What I want to be is the person who makes sure that the markets are in fact open to new competition, and that whatever it is that sets up barriers to entry for new combatants in this, capitalist war, that those barriers are low, and that competition can in fact enter and can drive the prices down. And history so far has shown that's what happens. The Dutch East India Company used to be the greatest company in the world. It used to rule everything. In retailing, Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward used to be the biggest retailers on the planet, and they controlled everything. So then a Walmart comes along and does it better and provides lower prices for consumers. So I want to make sure that Walmart can come along in every industry, and that should be the focus, I believe. Not trying to say what the price should be, but trying to make sure there are competitors who drive the prices down.
Can you give me your opinion on, do you believe these tariffs on China on some of the goods? Not so much Canada, because Canada, it's more retaliatory for what they're doing to our farmers over here. But for China per se, are you confident that President Trump putting a certain tariff on electronics or machinery can bring Apple to produce phones in America, to produce computers in America, for Caterpillar to come and produce equipment in America?
I have no doubt some of it will move here. And in fact, I said, you go back and look, you'll find it. I said, on Maria Bartiromo's show, I said it over and over again. In 2018, It's management malpractice for the companies not to be diversifying their supply chain away from China. It's 7 years later now, and a lot of them haven't done it yet. They've got to do it. It's so stupid not to do it. You don't only have just tariffs as a problem. Look, you have wars. Look what's happening with the Red Sea right now, where the Houthis cutting off supply. You have COVID showed us that trying to rely on everything from overseas created a terrible supply chain problem when that wasn't working very well.
Right.
So you don't need to just rely on tariffs to know that it's not smart to make everything in one place. And in fact, you should be diversifying it and making as much in the US as you can. And with AI, with automation, with robotics, it should be much more reasonable to make products in the US than it was when shipping it overseas was entirely dependent upon the low cost of labor that we talked about before, because that gap changes. One of the companies I'm very familiar with, but being a toy guy, by the way, is Lego. They still make a lot of Legos in Denmark. You can't find a more high cost production place than Denmark.
Yeah.
It's somewhat of a socialist type of environment. It's not a low cost operating environment, let me tell you what, but it's heavily robotics. The Legos that they make in Billund, Denmark. It's not the same kind of thing as what it used to be. So more and more should be brought back to the U.S. with automation driving it.
Terrific points you made there. You mentioned Maria Bartiromo, a very good woman, does a terrific job. I have to mention Maria Bartiromo's first job in television was working for Lou Dobbs some time ago. Before we wrap up here, we were talking before the show, and it's something that I wanted to end on here. And it's Toys R Us, a company that you know very well, a company that you ran for many, many years. I had mentioned you before the show. I was always under the impression that Toys R Us went out of business because they couldn't compete with Amazon in the prices. You telling me I'm wrong, and I stand corrected. Tell the audience, if you will, what happened to Toys R Us?
Now, I think a combination of factors. The biggest one is simply it was over leveraged. It was bought out from being a public company by a consortium of private equity owners, and they paid a fortune for it and put a lot of debt on it. So almost every dollar of cash that was generated by the business was used to pay interest on that huge debt. It's kind of like our country right now with that huge debt that we have as a country whole. It's not a good thing. So that's the biggest problem. It didn't leave any room for missteps, some of which inevitably happened and led to a downturn in the business. With that great leverage on it, it just couldn't keep going. It wasn't so much the internet, because Toys R Us had a big internet business and did a pretty good job for a long time of having different products than what Walmart had or Target, so that you had to go to Toys R Us with one of those great different products that they had overall. But that leverage just was so tight that you couldn't make a single misstep, and eventually they did.
That's very sad here. There's a store that we've all, probably every single person listening to the show, we have a big international audience too. You'd mentioned there's still some stores overseas, right?
There are in Europe and in China and even in Canada. And so, the name still exists in the U.S., where someone has bought the rights to the name and licensed it to some people to open up little shops that they call Toys R Us, but it's not the real thing.
That's a bit of nostalgia, Jerry. I spent many hours in that store, probably pulling on my mom's pants leg and being told by my dad to shut my mouth. But you get the last word here. I want to get before we wrap, your take, your outlook on the country over the next 2 years, 4 years, what you see happening. Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Where do you stand?
I remain optimistic, but the future is going to depend on how rapidly the administration can move to accomplish everything that it's promised. And if it can move, we have a 2-year window here. If there is a significant improvement, then there's another, obviously the House races and Senate races in the midterms, and a possibility that the monopoly on Congress that we have right now could change. So we have to move rapidly if we want to see the country improve.
Yeah, and you can bet the impeachment proceedings will start at the change of that Congress. Jerry Storch, I really appreciate you talking with us today. Please come back soon. I think the audience learned a great deal from you.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody, for being with us today. We hope you'll join us back here tomorrow for the Great America Show, where our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. We'll see you back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, may God bless you, may God bless America, and may God bless the great Lou Dobbs. We'll see you tomorrow, folks.